My name is Rachel Okafor. I'm 31 years old. 6 weeks ago, I was sitting at my parents' dining room table for Sunday dinner. The usual crowd: my parents, my brother Daniel and his wife, their 2 kids, my aunt and uncle visiting from Charlotte. 14 people, 3 kinds of casserole, and the same seating arrangement we'd had since I was 8 years old. My mother was making introductions for my aunt and uncle, who had brought a neighbor couple none of us had met. She went around the table. Daniel. Our son, the orthopedic surgeon. His wife. Our wonderful daughter-in-law. Their kids. Our brilliant grandchildren. Then she got to me. She smiled at the neighbor couple, gestured in my direction and said, "And this is Rachel, our disappointing one." She said it like a fact, like a zip code, like something permanently filed. The neighbor couple laughed, uncertain, as though they couldn't tell if it was a joke. My father chuckled and reached for the breadbasket. What none of them knew was that the envelope sitting in my bag had arrived that morning. What none of them knew was what was inside it. Before I tell you what happened when I opened that envelope at that table, please like and subscribe. But only if this story genuinely means something to you. Leave me a comment. Where are you watching from and what time is it there? I love hearing from you. Now let me take you back to where this started. Back to the beginning of being the disappointing one. Growing up in Columbus, Ohio, I was the second child, which in my family meant I was the understudy who never got the lead. My father, Charles Okafor, was a cardiologist, careful, precise, and fluent in a language of achievement that had exactly 2 dialects: medicine and law. My mother, Patricia, taught high school chemistry and had opinions about everything, delivered with the authority of someone who has never once doubted herself. My brother Daniel was 4 years older than me, pre-med from the age of 12, the kind of child who made adults say things like, "He's going somewhere." And then there was me. I loved books. I loved writing. I loved the way a sentence could hold more truth than a fact. I wanted to be an editor, then a journalist, then a writer, and these dreams shifted form over the years, but never their essential nature. I wanted to work with words. My father found this baffling. My mother found it impractical. They both found it, eventually, disappointing. I don't think they used the word deliberately in the beginning. I think it started as a joke, one of those family shorthand things that takes root because no one thinks to pull it out. Daniel was the success. Rachel was the disappointment. It was funny, maybe, the first time someone said it. It stopped being funny around the time I was 12 and noticed it was still being said. When I was 10, I won my school's Creative Writing Award 3 years in a row. The third time, I brought the certificate home and set it on the kitchen counter. My mother looked at it and said, "It's lovely, sweetheart, but you know writers don't really make money." My father didn't look up from his journal. Same year, Daniel placed 3rd in a regional science competition. They framed his certificate. It still hangs in the hallway. I told myself they just didn't understand creative work. I kept writing. At 15, I was accepted into a prestigious summer journalism program at Ohio State, one of 40 students selected from over 400 applications. I came home with the acceptance letter shaking with excitement. My father read the letter carefully. He handed it back. "It's a writing program," he said, "not pre-med." "I know," I said. "I want to do journalism." He looked at my mother. My mother looked at the ceiling briefly, then back at me. "We'll pay for it," she said. "But Rachel, we want you to understand that this is not a career. This is a hobby you're developing." I went. I learned. A professor there told me I had genuine talent, the kind that was rare, and I held on to those words for years like they were oxygen. At 21, I graduated from Ohio University's journalism school with honors and a byline in 3 regional publications before I'd even walked the stage. My parents attended graduation. At the dinner afterward, my father made a toast. He raised his glass and said, "To Daniel, who just accepted his residency at Cleveland Clinic, we are so proud of you, son." I was sitting at the same table with a diploma in my bag. Neither of my parents mentioned it. I told myself he was just excited about Daniel's residency. I cut my chicken and told myself it was fine. But I was writing everything down by then. Not just articles, everything. Every dinner, every toast that didn't include me, every introduction that made the table laugh at my expense. I wasn't keeping score for revenge. I was keeping it the way you keep a medical record. Because someday the pattern might matter, and you want the facts to be accurate. The real breaking point was 3 years ago, at Thanksgiving. I had just taken a position as a senior editor at a digital media company in New York. A real position, with a real salary, managing a team of 12 writers covering culture and long-form journalism. I had worked for 7 years to get to that office. I had freelanced through lean months and late nights and pitches that didn't land. I had built something real. I came home for Thanksgiving and I wanted, more than I had wanted almost anything in a long time, to tell my parents. To sit at that table and finally say, here is the thing I have been building. Here is proof that the path I chose was real. My mother was in the kitchen when I arrived. I told her about the promotion. She was stirring something on the stove and she said, "Oh, that's nice. Is it a stable company?" I said yes. She said, "And you're happy there?" I said, "Very happy." She nodded and said, "Well, good." And then she asked me to carry the sweet potatoes to the table. At dinner, my father did the toast. He spoke about the family. He thanked God for Daniel's growing practice. He thanked God for the grandchildren. He looked around the table and spoke everyone's name. Daniel, Angela, little Marcus, little Simone. And then he closed his eyes and said, "Amen." My name was not in the prayer. My aunt, my father's sister, Auntie Ruth, caught my eye from across the table. Her face said what she didn't say out loud. She reached over and briefly squeezed my hand under the tablecloth. I excused myself after the meal and sat in the bathroom for 8 minutes. I did not cry. I was past crying about this. I was into something colder and more useful. The quiet, steady kind of anger that doesn't burn out. The kind that becomes fuel. I went back to New York the next day. I called Auntie Ruth from the train. "I see you," she said, before I had said anything except hello. "I always see you, baby. Don't you forget that." I didn't forget it. I held it. Auntie Ruth was 71, lived alone since my uncle passed, and had worked her entire career as a school principal in Charlotte before retiring. She had never had children. She had opinions about everything, all of them delivered with a warmth my father's house seemed constitutionally unable to produce. We had always been close in the way that skipped-generation connections sometimes are. She had more patience for me than my parents ever found. We started talking every week. Real conversations. About my work, about the pieces I was proudest of, about what I was building and why. She asked questions. She remembered details from the previous week. She treated my career as a thing that mattered. I didn't know until much later what else she was doing during those conversations. What she was thinking about. What she had quietly decided. What I was focused on was the work. In the 2 years following that Thanksgiving, here is what I built. I expanded my team's reach by 340%, growing our monthly readership from 800,000 to just under 3 million unique visitors. I launched a long-form investigative vertical that was nominated for a National Digital Media Award. We didn't win, but we were 3 of 11 finalists, and that alone got us noticed. I negotiated a content partnership with a major streaming platform worth $1.2 million to my company that directly resulted in my promotion to editorial director, overseeing not 1 but 3 content divisions and a team of 41 people. My salary went from $67,000 to $141,000 in 24 months. I did not tell my parents any of this. I had learned, finally and completely, that sharing my wins with them was something I needed to stop doing for my own health. It wasn't spite. It was self-preservation. A plant stops turning toward a light source that has never once helped it grow. I told Auntie Ruth everything. She celebrated every milestone with the fullness it deserved. When I told her about the streaming partnership, she was quiet for a moment and then she said, Rachel, do you understand how extraordinary you are? I said I was starting to. Good, she said. Hold on to that. Promise me. I promised her. 6 months after that conversation, Auntie Ruth had a stroke. She survived, but it was a significant one, and she spent 3 weeks in the hospital and then 2 months in a rehabilitation facility. I flew to Charlotte 4 times. I sat with her. I read to her, which she said helped. Slowly, steadily, she came back to herself. Quieter than before, more careful with words, but her. Still entirely her. In February, she called me on a Tuesday evening. She said she'd had a productive meeting with her attorney. She said there were some things she'd been thinking about for a long time and had finally put in order. She said she was proud of me in a way that she wanted to make permanent. I told her I loved her and I didn't ask what she meant. It felt too private to press. The envelope arrived on a Saturday morning 6 weeks ago via certified mail from an attorney's office in Charlotte. Auntie Ruth was still alive. She is still alive, I want to be clear. But she had, as she later explained to me, decided to handle certain things while she was here to see them handled. The envelope contained a letter from her attorney and a cashier's check. The check was for $200,000. The letter explained that this was the first of 3 planned disbursements from a trust Auntie Ruth had established. It stated that she had chosen me, specifically and deliberately, because she believed in my future and wanted me to have the resources to build it on my own terms. There was a handwritten note from Auntie Ruth tucked inside. You earned this, baby. Not from me. You earned it from yourself. I'm just the one smart enough to see it. I held that check for a long time. I sat at my kitchen table in my New York apartment, and I held it and I thought about the bathroom at Thanksgiving 3 years ago. The 8 minutes. The decision not to cry. I had driven to Columbus that weekend for Sunday dinner before the envelope arrived, and I still had it in my bag when I sat down at that table. I had not planned to open it there. I had not planned anything. I was just going to get through dinner, and then my mother introduced me to the neighbor couple as the disappointing one, and something in me shifted. I reached into my bag. I set the envelope on the table. My father was mid-sentence about something with my uncle. The table was loud. I didn't make an announcement. I just opened the envelope, quietly, and unfolded the cashier's check and the letter, and I set them on the tablecloth in front of me. My cousin Marcus, who was 8, said, "Auntie Rachel, what's that?" "A letter from Auntie Ruth," I said. That got my father's attention. Ruth was his sister, and since her stroke, he had been monitoring her affairs with the low-level anxiety of someone waiting for a situation to require something of them. "What does Ruth want?" he said. "She wanted me to have this," I said. I slid the letter toward him. He read it. I watched his face. It was a particular kind of face I had never seen on my father. The face of a man being corrected by information he cannot argue with. His eyes moved to the cashier's check. He said nothing. My mother leaned over and read the letter. She looked up at me. $200,000? "The first disbursement," I said. "There are 2 more planned." The table had gone quiet. 14 people looking at me in a way they never quite had before. "Ruth did this?" my father said. He said it quietly, like a question he was asking himself. "She said she believes in my future," I said. "She wanted to make it permanent." I didn't look away from him. I wasn't angry, or if I was, it had traveled so deep it no longer showed on the surface. I was just there, present. 31 years old and finally taking up the exact amount of space I was entitled to. My aunt, the visiting one, my mother's sister, reached across and covered my hand with hers. "Rachel," she said, "tell us about your work. I've never actually heard you talk about it." So I did. I talked about the editorial director position. I talked about 3 million monthly readers. I talked about the streaming partnership. I talked about the award nomination. I talked for maybe 10 minutes and no one interrupted me, which had never once happened at that table in my entire life. When I finished, my father set down his fork. He looked at the tablecloth. He said, "I didn't know any of that." "No," I said, "you didn't." That was all. Daniel, to his credit, raised his wine glass. "To Rachel," he said. Simple, clean, no qualifiers. "To Rachel," my aunt echoed, and then others around the table, the neighbor couple included, raised their glasses too. My mother was quiet. She is still quiet on the subject. I think she is working something through in whatever language she has for that kind of work, and I've made my peace with not knowing when or whether she finishes. My father called me 2 weeks later and asked if we could have lunch. Just the two of us. We did. He told me he was proud of me. He said it in the careful way of someone who knows they are arriving late to something that should have been said much earlier. I thanked him. I paid for my own lunch. It has been 6 weeks since that Sunday dinner. Auntie Ruth is doing beautifully. She started a walking group at her community center in Charlotte and calls me every Thursday to tell me who said what during the walk. I am flying down to see her next month, and I am bringing her flowers and probably crying on her couch, which she will pretend to find annoying and actually love. The trust disbursement is sitting in a high-yield savings account while I work with a financial advisor on what comes next. I'm thinking about something of my own, not leaving my company but something alongside it. A publication. A small one, focused on the kind of writing that made me fall in love with words in the first place. I'm in the early stages. I'm taking my time. I think about the word disappointing sometimes. I think about how it got said so often that everyone at that table, including, for a long time, me, just accepted it as true. I think about how a label placed on a child can calcify into a fact if no one ever thinks to check whether it actually fits. It didn't fit. It never fit. It was just a word someone used when they didn't understand what they were looking at. If there is someone in your life who has handed you a label that doesn't belong to you, I want to say this directly. You are allowed to put it down. You don't have to keep carrying something that was never yours to carry. Other people's inability to see your value is not evidence that the value isn't there. It is only evidence of their limitations, and their limitations are not your inheritance, unless you let them be. The envelope didn't arrive because I waited for it. It arrived because I spent 7 years building something real while no one was watching. The money matters less than what it represents. Someone saw me clearly and chose to say so in a way that could not be dismissed or redirected or buried under a toast to someone else. Be the kind of person Auntie Ruth saw. Not for her, not for me. For yourself first and always. Build the thing. Write the thing. Do the work no one is watching. Let the envelope find you. If this story reached you today, please like and subscribe, only if it genuinely meant something. And tell me in the comments, has someone in your family ever used a word about you that you've spent years trying to disprove? I want to hear it. I read every comment, every one. My name is Rachel Okafor. I'm 31 years old, and I am nobody's disappointment.